Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to a live order book scalping session. Today it's Wednesday, April 29th, and it is currently 11:49 a.m. And we are looking at the Treasury Bonds, and I just had started my DOMs to look what is going on, and I decided to record the session because we do see a critical point at this time on the Treasury Bonds. Now, we obviously have currently a breakout out of the volume profile here on the 10-year and also on the 30-year, and we can see definitely that there was bearish power during that breakout out of the volume profile step. The reason why I am pointing this out is I wanted to give you guys an example, hopefully before it happens. Now, let's say there were sellers at this here 260 level who basically, hit the bid, cleared it, and that was basically the first step of the breakout, and they were able to push through, right? So they had follow through. Now, if at some point here, let's say at the 245 level, we do see, for example, a big number hitting the bid, clearing it, but there is no real follow through, and we do see indeed that buyers start to attack. The sellers are currently still in control over that level, but someone may either accumulate positions here via limit orders or take market orders. And now obviously that was not the case here, but my point is, if the seller here has generated that breakout, price comes here, we do see a lot of absorption, and suddenly there is no real follow through. Now, this could be that example I was talking about. We see a big number, right, that cleared that level. The level below it became smaller, and now look at this. Boom. This is exactly, thank you, ZN, for giving me the perfect example. If this here number gets printed, it does not mean necessarily that the buyers are taking market orders, right? I mean, sure, someone may accumulate here, a potential buyer, right? First via limit orders, as soon as he sees that the sellers becoming weaker after previously 2,000-ish contracts, right? They may take market orders, right? And that will obviously be printed here, right? Now, that is one thing. But the second thing we don't have to overlook is if the seller generated that breakout and he notices, okay, he has no longer a follow through, right? Obviously, he wants to get rid of his positions. He will place limit orders, but if he sees that, okay, there are no sellers willing to continue that breakout, right, then he will exit manually by taking market orders. So yes, it can be buyers who are absorbing first passively. If they cannot do that, they will take market orders, and then that will be printed here. And it can be the seller who started to sell here. He now notices, okay, the attack is getting weaker. My limit orders, will not be filled, for example, and then he may get out with market orders, right, by actively providing liquidity into the market, and that also may be printed here. So when we see a large number, it does not always mean that it is a buyer. Yeah, it could be, but we have to look at the context. Is there absorption? Is someone controlling the pace of selling exhaustion, right? Before making the assumption that if we see a big number suddenly here, for example, that, okay, the buyers are stepping in. It may be just the seller, guys, who is, getting rid of his contracts faster by taking market orders. That may also be printed here, right? If they cannot get, rid of his inventory via limit orders, then obviously he will start to take market orders, right? Because every tick counts, obviously. Now, let me have a look. Okay. In the meantime, I will also try to catch a few ticks here and there. But I just wanted to start out with, explaining that configuration while it happens in, live world or real-time conditions, right? So at this point, either the sellers, who started to sell here are getting rid of their inventory by placing them on the buy side, either passively or getting rid of it actively. Or it can be a buyer who starts to, absorb indeed. And when that happens and the seller who sold here sees that, he may also still get rid of. So then it is basic double impact, right? The buyers plus the seller who gets rid on the buy side. That can obviously, create a shift in dynamics, right? So that's why it's very important not only to look at, okay, yes, the sellers are the aggressors, and we have to look at the context, right? And basically put yourself in the shoes or mind of both sides. And from there, you can basically, keep an eye on the interaction between passive and aggressive participants and basically put everything together, in conjunction with the context. And obviously, if you want to take it a little bit more advanced, then you can apply game theoretical framework to the auction market theory. And always keep an eye out for those liquidity games, right? Because that's exactly what it is. One side tries to benefit from the other side by, not showing their hand, but outsmart them, right? So on the 30-year, if the buyers are starting to line up here, then they, almost clear that level. And if sellers start to pull out, as soon as the buyers attack, I could consider a buy position, because at this year level, the buyers are currently in control. So the sellers are just testing the buyers. It's very important to keep an eye on this. And you notice that the buyers basically pulled out 300-ish contracts to see if the sellers will engage as soon as they do that. But there is absolutely no reaction so far from the sellers. So they tough it out, right? And now they try to anticipate what the sellers will do here. Will they pull out as soon as they add again contracts on the bid? And now the buyers are basically testing the sellers here. Now on the 30-year, we are currently getting a thicker volume profile at this year price level. However, the sellers are definitely okay. Now, if the sellers clear this level here and start to attack, not only test, but really attack these levels, then I should consider getting out, because currently we still do see that there is definitely some selling pressure on the 10-year. So I may have jumped a bit too early into my buy position, but that's the thing. I will not focus only on the selling pressure, but also how the buyers react at the bottom of the, well, current price range, right? Because if the sellers are not getting rewarded for their effort, right? If there is no real follow through, then yeah, they may, exit their positions at break even, and even those limit orders on these levels may pull out. Oh, I'm just getting out, guys, because okay, cancel my exit. Okay. I do notice some backticking on the 30-year, but okay. A very aggressive attack on the 10-year from the sellers, but the buyers leave nothing behind. So far they are absorbing. So my eyes are currently on the 10-year, but my mouse is hovering over at my entry for a break even if necessary. So basically thinking out loud here, guys, and just follow the voice and not my mouse on the screen. Yeah, so the 10-year definitely shows that the sellers are still attacking and that the buyers are absorbing. Now on the 30-year, I do see no prints from the sellers at the 100 level. The buyers are attacking the sellers at 110, the ask level, and they just cleared it. So that is very nice to see. Gives me confidence to indeed not exit my position as of yet, because the conditions just changed in my favor. Let's see. And this could be also a great example of one of those scenarios that I was explaining earlier, right? Either, let's say, at the bottom of the market, buyers step in first, they accumulate inventory by placing limit orders, by passively, acquiring liquidity. And if that level gets cleared, they wait until the sellers, try to test those levels here. And if they don't, they will take obviously a couple of market orders here to not scare the sellers, right, immediately. And if, that small attack gives the sellers the idea, oh, it was just 30 contracts, keeps attacking, right? And that is the intention or strategy, obviously, of that passive buyer, so that he can again accumulate more positions at a favorable price, right, via limit orders for a better price. And as soon as he notices that the attack is getting weaker, he will take more market orders, but again in stages or phases, right, to see how the sellers are reacting. And if he notices that the sellers indeed are pulling out, he will follow with taking market orders, and couple that with the exit of the sellers, which become market orders here, can definitely, cause that very rapid shift in dynamics. And that is also a way for a passive buyer to, basically control the pace of the selling exhaustion. where he can obviously accumulate inventory, limit orders, or market orders, and or, right, combination of hybrid execution, and then he can basically lift the offers by clearing them easily if sellers start to pull out, right? And on the other hand, again, if a seller, here sold and now he notices, okay, there is no real follow through to take out the daily low at 230, and he notices that, that other sellers who want to generate that breakout are becoming weaker, well, then that's a signal for the seller here to get out, right? And not risk for the market to come back if that first scenario with the passive buyer is at play. And that's why if there are sellers attacking but not getting any follow through, he will first, exit his positions via limit orders. And if the attack is getting weaker and the buyers start to attack, he will join that attack, right, by basically exiting his positions by taking market orders to get rid of his inventory faster, right? So again, double buy pressure, so to call it, right, from both buyer and seller. And yeah, that can cause panic among those sellers who were indeed looking for the breakout and then bail out, puke out at break even or take a take loss. Those become market orders, and and so far we can see that kind of shift in dynamics happening here. Now the sellers again do engage, right, because we have a lower volume node here at 245 in comparison with, let's say, 250 and 240. And again, the buyer here is reducing his number, probably deliberately, to keep sellers engaged, right? So as soon as the sellers attack, he may again, either clear his level, to get in at better price here. If the sellers don't attack, he may start to take market orders to, keep control, right, of that selling exhaustion. And there you go. Perfectly example, of what I basically just, told, right? And again, now he is basically passively, and look at that, boom, it just went higher. So look at these numbers as soon as the buyers start to print, right? Because this is just a intimidation tactic, right? Like, what is it? A peacock showing its feathers full of beautiful colors, right? To scare off his enemies. And that's basically what is happening here. So the buyer immediately, showed his hand. And since then, there was no real attack from the sellers. Now, the sellers did attack because the buyers basically did not test that level here. Only, stacked positions here, but that was not enough to scare off sellers. And that's why the sellers attacked. Again, clear that level. But if the, there are no contracts printed here, then the buyer here knows, okay, there are no sellers who are willing to follow through. And that's why here again, he takes market orders, right? And even loads up, again, inventory here via limit orders. So definitely some nice price action going on. Let's see here. Okay. And look what happened here, right? Those thousands of contracts basically pulled out, and the sellers were able to clear that level, quote unquote, with, 180 contracts alone. And that can be done deliberately, again, by that passive buyer who is still probably accumulating positions around these lows, right? Because we immediately do see that the attack of the sellers are weakening. And if that happens, then probably that same, passive buyer who has accumulated via limit orders and now is taking, market orders to control again the pace of exhaustion of the selling. And look at that, right? So we also immediately saw this number here reducing from the sellers. That's why the buyer keeps testing / attacking that level. Okay. Now a weaker attack from the seller or sellers, right? And look at that, boom. Now why did that happen? Because again, right, the buyer is basically controlling the pace of the selling exhaustion, right? He has to take every now and then market orders to control these levels, right? Hopefully my buy position will be triggered first. That placing of my sell limit order was basically due to queuing, right? There was before 900-ish contracts and now it's 1100-ish. So basically to exit my potential buy position if it gets triggered, to exit also faster, right? And especially if more sellers are pulling out after my position is triggered and buyers yet again start to test that level, right? And the ask level at 120. Now on the 10-year, we can clearly see that the buyer indeed is, the sellers do not realize that, they are becoming trapped at this point. And why do I know that? Because, again, the buyer is controlling the pace of exhaustion, right? He is quietly accumulating inventory at these lower levels. And we already see, in comparison with the previous downward move, right? The prior initial breakout, those thousands of numbers that were printed here is now obviously smaller in comparison currently. And that's why, if the sellers do not attack this here 240 level, yeah, well, that did not scare off buyers at this point. Basically, not much changed. But now the buyer will again reduce his contracts to, to keep those sellers engaged, right? He's basically saying, well, I will take your contracts. But obviously he is not showing his hand. Otherwise the sellers will not engage, right? I mean, if he puts, let's say, an iceberg order, then he can acquire as much as, contracts or inventory as he wants by keeping the sellers engaged. But let's say if he places 30,000 contracts here, boom, then obviously the sellers will not even try to attack that, right? So, and you notice that the sellers cleared it and immediately we had a refresh, reload. Now again the buyer is taking more market orders. Now as long as sellers are not starting to print here, my position on the 30-year should be fine. I mean, even though the market conditions are pretty slow currently, it's not a bad thing because, whenever I am trading, without, giving real commentary, right? I do record my sessions, and sometimes, you may not hear me, or hear some background music, but that's basically done deliberately because I record every trading session for, my own case study purposes, so I can case study them, during the weekends. And that helps me also to stay sharp, focused, and keep developing my edge, learn from my mistakes, and become better in the strategies that I already, can execute pretty good. And to understand and learn, obviously, to continue. Because if you're a trader, guys, you're basically a student for life, all right? Like car mechanics or surgeons, right? They always have to study their entire life, basically to keep up with technology. And, if you fall behind, obviously your business will fail. And in trading, it's the same, right? If you do not know how to get out of your comfort zone, think out of the box and develop your skills or keep developing them, then you may fall behind. That's just, the harsh truth. And what we want is basically to stay a step ahead, right? So that's why the DOM or order book gives me an edge on itself in comparison with, let's say, charts, candlesticks, because those are basically lagging indicators, right? Like, EME and, all those other, indicators you have, because, candles are basically the result of the battle, and the order book is where the actual battle is happening, right? Where it's been fought. And the information that is provided by the order book definitely helps, to make split-second decisions. But like I said, there's always room to improve. Never think that you have reached the top of the mountain and that you can take it easy from there. No, if you have reached the top of the mountain, just find a bigger mountain, right? Okay, so I now notice that, that buyer who has accumulated, right, is now again lifting offers. And now he's again, after clearing this level, he will not, expose his hand entirely. So he again tests that level, and, to see if sellers are still willing, at least, to keep in control of that previous selling pressure. And if he notices that, then obviously he will not attack. He will just sit there and absorb, and perhaps even again pull out. If he notices that, oh wow, there are still, the last wave of sellers present, let's keep them engaged. But if he notices, that, selling pressure has worn out, then obviously, he may gradually place bigger market orders. And from there, once the stops of those sellers who had no follow through here and realize that they are trapped, right? And if those sellers stop loss gets triggered again, becomes also market orders. So at that point, the move basically feeds itself, right? So that the buyer does not have to attack aggressively any longer. I don't see as of yet buyers, attacking this level after a previous, attack in comparison with a smaller attack from the sellers at this year level, and instead they pulled out, right? Like that. They're pulling out as soon as the sellers are attacking a little bit more, you see, but even though we don't see anything here, there's a potential iceberg order there, right? Because even though the sellers keep attacking and this level is not showing any limit orders, market orders are taken. That's why this year number is getting bigger in the inside print or tape, right? And as soon as the sellers attack, we have again orders stacking, reloading, and look at this. That buyer here is basically, strategically keeping sellers engaged. Because if he can collect thousands or even tens of thousands of contracts here, and he can gradually push the price higher, and he can then exit here, right, by basically profiting from breakout buyers, traders here, and then, well, he has basically succeeded, right? And if these moves happen, then it's obviously someone who can, push size and move the markets, right? So probably, most likely, an institutional player, Okay. Let's see if the sellers will line up here at this level and start to test the 110 level at the 30-year. If so, I could get out at break even, or risk a one tick loss, because if the sellers start to attack this level and that buyer also here pukes out, right, after just profiting from a couple of ticks, let's say. I mean, it's all possible, right? No one can predict what will happen. Yeah, we can make educated guesses based on context, which helps, obviously. And, to keep an eye on things like the aggressive versus passive flow. Where is absorption occurring, right? Where are the areas that liquidity games are played? Now that move here was again after, and that's the thing, right? So the buyer who is accumulating thousands of contracts here, he will move 2 ticks higher, and then to keep the sellers engaged, he will pull out limit orders and we will have a tick lower. And then he will again move 2 ticks higher and then, pull out the limit orders, and the sellers will move the price 1 tick lower to keep them engaged, right? So 2 ticks higher for the buyer, 1 tick lower for the seller, 2 ticks higher for the buyer, 1 tick lower for the seller. And that is important to notice. so we can at least determine if our, look at the market is correct, the strategy behind it, right? Our execution. I didn't see any sellers lining up so far here. They're just, taking market orders, and boom. Luckily for me, my target got hit, right? So, and let's see. Okay. Yeah. If the sellers are now not getting the aggressors here, right? And the buyers are also still in control over that level, and this one also currently, I could consider taking another buy position at this here lower volume node, right? Pressure point. And then this 110 level could act as my protection point, right? Okay, so not the ideal, queuing for me, but luckily some buyers pulled out. And if they keep doing that, as soon as sellers, start to attack, then my position just may get filled. Now, I would like to place an exit already here due to the fact that I would be very close to, well, at least below 1,000 contract. But, looking at what is happening here, it may just trigger my sell position first instead of the buy position. That's why I am waiting patiently to see if the sellers indeed will engage before buyers start to lift the offer here and my sell position gets triggered, right? Because then obviously, I could use one tick potential loss if price tends to tick lower, but okay, maybe that might not be a bad idea to do it now, because if my sell position first gets triggered, I already see that we have some difficulties at these here levels, right? So if the buyer now, after moving the price again 2 ticks higher, may start to pull out deliberately, right, to keep sellers engaged so he can accumulate more inventory, the price may tick 1-2 ticks lower on the 10-year, and if it ticks 1 tick lower on the 30-year, it should exit my position, because that buyer again is clearly, visible on the 10-year. Then he, like I said, he will move the price 2 ticks higher and pull out limit orders, and the sellers push it 1 tick lower. And, if he can keep them engaged and he can even, accumulate more positions here, he will obviously do that. But if he notices that, okay, the attack is getting, again, weaker, then he will start this level, test this level. Okay, so let me try. Okay. Well, let's see. And he may do that to keep those sellers engaged and then test these levels like he's doing now, right? And if he notices that the sellers are defending themselves and not, a longer attack, then he may, increase his aggressive attacks. And if the sellers start to pull out, then obviously, he will clear that level and move a tick higher, and then buyers will line up here, and then he will probably test this level by that time. But let me see. Okay. Oh. Yeah. Let me get out with one tick loss, guys, because on the 30-year, I do see that the buyer is still willing to lift the offers. So yeah, small mistake. I misread the situation there, but it's okay. I mean, we cannot always be right? You know, making mistakes, well, if you can call it a mistake, you know, losing is not a bad thing. We can learn from it, right? As long as we don't make a habit out of losing. Yeah, I will try to make up for that one tick loss with a additional position at the same price level. If I lose a tick here, I can gain it back with hopefully one tick if the price comes into this year point of control. So basically, I went against the whole theory that I explained at the beginning. But it's not going against my theory. It's just, you know, of course, you can always benefit from a backtick action, all right? But yeah, sometimes I guess you are either too focused that you cannot see the forest through the trees, or, you know, you can make a mistake, right? The thing is, well, not to repeat that mistake. And we can always reassess, obviously, and, you know, continue focusing on what is happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I should have considered placing a limit order here earlier when the price was there, because we do have a pressure point at 160. So and we also noticed that wait for it. Okay, boom. Okay, that went pretty fast, but the reason why I also placed my sell position, which hopefully gets triggered before my buy position in this particular case, because I do see smaller contracts here and larger contracts printed on the sell side. And again, it can be sellers engaging, right, defending, attacking, or it can be that buyer who at this point is unloading perhaps half his inventory, right, by taking market orders as soon as he realizes there are no real buyers who, want to push through these lower volume nodes, right? So that could be a factor, right? If my sell position gets triggered first, that my buy position here, is also likely to be triggered. However, at the point of control, and there you go, right? So, and that is a good example of catching just a backtick, right? Instead of always trying to go for that continuation. Because, we have to look at the context and, order flow and, what is happening at, crucial areas, right? How the dominant player, in this case the buyer, is basically reacting and playing out his strategy. Okay, let's see. Now that was the actual move that hopefully will reflect on the 30-year. Well, when I say hopefully, I'm not going in blindly, right? I see something. If it reflects, then I should be good. If not, I'm not like a rabbit, crossing the road and freezing like when he sees a car light. No, I will obviously adapt, adjust. But so far, it looks good. Let's see how the sellers react as soon as buyers start to test that level. Currently, what I'm seeing here looks good. Okay, so on the 10-year, we already have a test of the buyers of a tick higher. They just cleared that level easily. Sellers are lining up. But let's see, they are not attacking as of yet. So okay, keep an eye on this year level, 700-ish, 24. Okay, you see, we definitely have, some pulling. Now, in the meantime, it did reflect on the 30-year, which also filled my exit, which is good. Let me try to join the buy side. Unfortunately, my position did not get triggered, but I am waiting to see what is happening. Yep, I am willing to sacrifice a tick to get out of this here pressure point, because if it is likely that buyers, after sellers failed to cross that point of control here, and we noticed that they took over control over that 140 level, right? They even cleared this level here. However, they were not testing the level higher, but you know, I just adjusted my strategy on the 10-year. No prints, buyers are attacking. We do see a little bit of absorption though, but let's see if this number gets bigger, how sellers will react to that, if, right? And if the sellers start to test this level or even attack it, if the buyers pull out, I may consider exiting at a break even before it reflects on the 30-year, right? But we can see that the 10-year is a bit more lively, right? Sometimes it goes back and forth, 1-2 ticks, and there is absolutely no movement on the 30-year. So just gotta keep an eye on things. Okay, sellers did line up here. However, they are not testing this level, point of control. Neither are the buyers testing the ask at 150. So basically, they are either waiting, challenging, bluffing each other out, right? That's why the 10-year can help a little whenever this situation plays on the 30-year, right? Okay. Right? Clear that level, the ask at 260. However, sellers immediately lined up again. And now we do see something similar, right? Contracts printed, nothing. Contracts printed, nothing. So let's see how this 10-year tends to play out. Okay. Look, both parties are reducing contracts deliberately, right? No one is willing to cross the spread. Okay, now the sellers on the 30-year test at this level here. And as soon as the buyers notice that, they reduce their limit orders, but immediately are refreshing or reloading. But they keep it deliberately smaller in comparison with what the sellers are doing, right? On the current ask level. On the 10-year, there's, now they start to print. And now look at this. Let's see if they are... Okay. Same thing is happening on the 30-year. Let's see if the buyers will test the levels here and how those numbers react, because I can already see that the limit orders are currently not as big as those of the sellers. So at some point we can expect the sellers also reducing, which is now just happening, right? So now they basically equaled out. And now again, those changes occur, right? So okay, that is very good. Yes. Yep, just got bigger, real big. They just pulled out. So on a 30-year, the buyers may even start to test the sellers at the ask, current ask at 150. $1,400, $3,200, $800, $600. Okay, now you see. So far, no engagement though from the buyers. Now, okay. On the 30-year, we see the attack, right? Reducing. If we look at it isolated and not, you know, the total amount or accumulated amount. Okay. Now the buyers are starting to add contracts on the tape by taking market orders. Okay. I just noticed that sellers pulled out a lot of contracts. And if the buyers now do not attack, then it's probably that they strategically are inducing sellers to attack them by taking market orders after no attack is, played out. So they can probably accumulate a little bit more here because we had no follow through of the previous attack. So it's basically, and look at this, right? So now they definitely clear that level with lesser contracts than that was, offered. Okay. And that was exactly what I was talking about, right? That they wait, and if the attack does not continue, then obviously they will try to take control over this year price level, which currently they did, right? Let me center the DOMs. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. It's become pretty quiet. And I do see a bit more action going on the 10-year though. So I am, focusing mainly currently at the price action on the 10-year while keeping my eye on the 30-year. Okay, that is very nice indeed. And now let's just see if, buyers will line up here. So far they did that. Okay. So whenever the market becomes a bit, flat, we can definitely, focus a bit more on how the current bid-ask levels are reacting to those conditions, and who is willing to, cross the spread, but also obviously while keeping an eye on absorption, right? But absorption on itself, like I mentioned in a previous video, does not mean that, okay, the price may rotate in the opposite direction, right? We have to look again at the overall context, look if there is backticking, look if there is, absorption, or, the participants controlling the pace of exhaustion, or, those concepts we definitely have to keep an eye on. Now, if the buyers are unable to line up here and test these levels, then obviously I could consider exiting at my break even. Okay. Now on the 10-year, I still notice that the buyers are, engaged, right? So a little bit of absorption here from the buy side when the sellers became the aggressors and took over control. And okay, they are not showing their hand to keep the sellers engaged, right? Basically to lure or, induce sellers to keep engaged. And even though that level was cleared, it was not because of sellers became very aggressive, right? It's because buyers deliberately pulled out, clear that level to see if the sellers will test this level. If yes, then they can, continue accumulating through, limit orders. But if the sellers do not attack, then they don't want the price to, come to a halt or whatever. So they will then gradually test the sellers here. And look at this, like we had immediately a couple of hundred of contracts pulled out, right? With, I believe, a couple of contracts printed from the buy side. And if the buyers keep attacking and that keeps occurring, then, if the sellers start to pull out, then that buyer gradually starts again clipping through a couple of price levels at least. Because we can currently clearly see that 255, 250, 245, 240 level, well, except 240, but these three price levels, we have absolutely no sell contracts printed currently. So we know that there was currently, previously, someone who was willing to, accumulate a huge amount of size at the bottom of the market, as I, explained, right? And now look at this, they just cleared that level with 270 contracts, right? And now they are again testing this here level. So it's basically the same thing, but, it's the same thing, but under different, situations or scenarios around the volume profile and, context, obviously. Okay. 1200-ish, 300-ish. Yeah, so the sellers were able just to print 2 contracts here. Now 712. And again, that level was cleared, not per se because sellers were the aggressors, right? And they cleared it with the total amount of contract which was advertised here. No, the buyers pulled out deliberately to see if the sellers will attack, and as soon as they notice that, okay, no, that's not the case, and look at this, even though there is, no buyers lining up, there is someone willing to take market orders to keep, control over those price levels. So that should indicate or reflect at least that gradually the buyer, and look at this, right? He will be able to clip through these price levels. But, obviously he is the one who is determining the pace, right? Unfortunately, that is not something that is shown in the order book. Well, eventually we can identify those phenomena and just react to it, right? And we can only do that by being patient. Okay. Let's see if the buyer now will test that level here, because he's definitely present at this level every time the sellers are attacking. He is, willing to absorb, you see, and as soon as that level gets cleared and no one is attacking here, again, boom, he is just, cleared that level again with just 100 contracts. So the buyer here, at some point will know that, okay, the sellers, puke out, or there is no determination anymore from the sell side to push lower, even though he lured them into more, selling at lower levels. But now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 levels currently in which no selling contracts are printed. So now we definitely had a shift, right, from where the price came down earlier until the bottom of the market. And from there, like I said, right, there was no real breakout at that point. Someone silently accumulated, inventory and was basically controlling the pace of the, selling pressure. And now the price is currently trading around the POC. So we may at some point notice that, yes, the buyer may either get rid of, half or, entire contracts around these levels. But if he notices that, there are other buyers willing to join the continuation of, bullish pressure, power, momentum, then he can decide to hold on to his position a little longer, like mentioned, and decide to, let's say, get out these areas, right? Because probably there will be breakout traders here. Okay, now I do see a little bit of a shift in dynamics. However, let's... If this number here gets bigger again, or if the sellers now attack and, you know, take control over this year level. Well, this was just a small test from the sell side after the buyer, you know, may pulled out again yet deliberately his contracts here, but he was only able to collect 16 additional contracts via limit orders here, presumably. And that's why if he starts to take market orders again, we should be able to see that printing here. Yep, there you go. And look, immediately again, that level got cleared. Now they even attacked that price level here. So they should reflect on the 30-year as well. We moved 1-2 ticks higher on the 10-year. Yeah, we do see a little bit of absorption though. But currently the buyers are in control over this year level and this year level at this time. So yes, there is a little bit of absorption going on, but the sellers are not, you know, willing to cross the spread as of yet and take market orders because there are no additional contracts printed so far. And, you know, okay, we can also see on the 30-year that the sellers are not willing to cross the spread. As soon as the buyers cleared that level with 106, in this case 145 contracts, there are some sellers who are willing to take market orders. So that's why we see the same thing here happening, what happened earlier here, right? Look at this. This level, the bid level at 150 did not get cleared because sellers were aggressive. No, it got cleared because the buyer has presumably and deliberately pulled out his contracts to see if the sellers will, you know, test/attack this year level. If yes, yeah, that is more advantage to him, right? That's why, you know, he can accumulate more inventory. But if the sellers do not attack, he will take a couple of market orders to test these levels. He will first do so with a minimum amount to see if there is any kind of reaction. And if he notices, wow, okay, well, no, there is not any real reaction because he tests liquidity, right, currently on the ask level. And if he notices that, okay, no, the sellers are not really willing to, you know, attack aggressively, then he can gradually pick up, you know, his attack. And look at this, with just a couple of additional contracts, immediately he cleared that level. So now he knows that, no, there are not really willing sellers willing to, let's say, defend this year point of control. And, you know, that's why he is now again putting limit orders here in case some of sellers do take market orders. He can get filled here, and eventually again may combine that, you know, with taking market orders intermittently. All right. So let's just see. Now this year price does not move, but we also see that ever since the buyers attacked aggressively, no seller was willing to take a market order. So currently they are just defending themselves, right? Which is a good sign for me, because if they are not attacking, it can motivate that buyer, the big player, to take more market orders to see how this current ask level at 265 reacts. Let's say if we see suddenly 3,000 contracts here, we have 1,700 here, meaning with a additional 700, okay, now 1,600-ish, right? So with an additional, let's say 700 contracts, he cleared this level, while there is 1,300-ish there, right? And if that happens, obviously the sellers will pull out, and there will be limit orders placed here in case the sellers will start to attack that level. And if he notices after no attack and again a weak attack, he will just continue to take market orders, right? To try to lift the offer. And now luckily my position got filled here. So, and looking at the time, we are currently 1 hour and 16 minutes-ish into the session. Yeah, made a small loss, but luckily I was able to, make up for that loss. Currently up in profits with $1,000, so definitely not bad, right? For spending 60 minutes, 1 hour with, the Treasury Bond, the 30-year. Kind of looks good. I do like what I'm seeing, but guys, I got such a dry throat. I have to drink something from all that talking, I guess. So I will leave it here, and we'll come back later sometime during the New York session. Obviously, when I do, I will record the session and also upload that one. So they may be a continuation of this year's session, but with breaks in between, so I can trade in stages throughout the day. Yeah, and I hope you guys picked up a couple of things that you perhaps did recognize whenever they happen in the order book, but did not have an answer for what was happening. If so, just let me know in the comment section below. That will confirm that I'm doing a good job so far in explaining you guys certain concepts and or phenomena whenever they happen in the order book, and that will help the channel. That will also motivate me to keep making this live recordings with live commenting. If you're not subscribed, then you can always decide, obviously, to subscribe so you don't miss out anything. But I leave that up to you guys, and any comment is appreciated. I will catch you guys later. Trade responsible and safe, and stay blessed.